It was about dawn one morning, and a man heard outside of his house a commotion. A commotion unlike anything he'd ever heard. And he was fearful that someone was trying to break into his house. But when he went outside, what he found was a pesky woodpecker that had been around for a while. But on this morning, he was tapping on the gutter of the house. And so the man thought, well, I'm going to get rid of him. I'm going to get rid of him this morning at least, because he is annoying me and he has awakened me from my sleep. And so he picked up a rock and he threw it at the woodpecker. He missed, but he missed so soundly that the rock went over the house, and all of a sudden he heard a crash and he knew it had hit his car. And about that time, in his disgust, he tried to kick a rock that was nearby, only to remember he had no shoes on. And he learned a lesson as he told the story a little later on. He said, you learn where and when to put your anger. The reality of it is we live in a world where other folks and we grow angry. We get angry from time to time. We read about it in the papers. We hear about it on the news. We listen to it and we see where people just can't get along. You hear of stories of road rage and killings and folks that just don't like each other. I was reading the first part of this week where there was a baseball fan out in Los Angeles that was a Mets fan, a New York Mets fan, out at Los Angeles at the Dodgers game with the Mets. And after the game, the Dodgers fan killed the Mets fan. Wrong team. We hear all the time of police getting into difficulties that are very hard for them to get out of, and it's all because of domestic violence. We hear constantly of people fighting and people growing angry and upset at others, what they've done to us and how they've treated us. Physicians say that they say about 60% of a lot of our medical issues are due to anger and the management of it. The reality of it is we know that we need to get past it. And the question is, how do we get past it? How do we get past the anger that either an individual feels for us? Because, sometimes we do make folks angry at us. We do push other people's buttons from time to time. And it's to the point where, you just need to either leave their presence or leave, period. But there are times in which people push our buttons and we grow angry. We get mad. We get upset. And we have to ask ourselves, how do we keep from doing that? How does the wise man, according to the book of Proverbs, how does the wise man turn away from the wrath of others? And how does he turn that wrath into something good? Well, Solomon in the book of Proverbs gives us some answers on really how to deal with others' angers toward us, and in a lot of ways our own anger. And the first thing that he really tells us is be careful how we answer. We hinted at this morning, but in Proverbs 15 and verse 1, Solomon reminds us that it's a soft answer that turns away wrath. It's a soft answer. It's the way we respond. Oftentimes, how do we respond? We respond in kind. You yell, I yell. And if you yell, I yell a little louder than you yell, in order that my yelling can be heard over your yelling. Have you ever done that with someone? Have you ever started out in a peaceful, calm conversation, and the next thing you know, they yell at you because they got mad at you for something, and then the next thing you know, you're yelling at them. And then it goes back and forth until you realize, or they realize, that why are we upset? Why are we angry? And yet, we need to remember that we need to be individuals that instead of returning in kind, that we return an answer with kindness. That we learn to moderate our answers and our tone of voice. And we learn to be individuals that are soft in our answer. A lot of times it will change the attitude. It will change the impression that others have of the whole conversation just by understanding that this is a simple answer. It's an easy answer. I'm calm and I'm rational in the midst of all this chaos. Because usually what happens with anger? Well, when we get angry, our blood pressure goes up, our heart rate goes up. Usually there is some sort of external, if you will, external appearance that changes. We get flush, our jaw gets a little rigid, our eyes maybe even bug out a little bit more than what they are normally. And it's very easy, especially if you're known by the other person. They read your body language to know they're angry. And then sometimes they have the audacity to say, I'm not angry. Well, no, but you're mad. No, I'm not mad. And Solomon says, it's a soft answer. It's an easy answer. It turns away wrath. It's a kindness that comes. Because of what is said, one realizes there's no reason to fuss, there's no reason to fight, there's no reason to fume, there's no reason to get upset. And so Solomon says, first thing we need to do is we need to have a soft answer. But then secondly, we learn really to have a short fuse and be slow, and to be slow to anger. If you have your Bibles with you, turn to Proverbs, the 14th chapter and verse 29. Solomon makes the statement that he that is slow to wrath has great understanding. But then he says also, and if you're looking there in Proverbs, look in the 15th chapter and the 18th verse. Because Solomon makes also another statement. He says, a wrathful man stirs up strife, but he that is slow to anger allays contention. You ever had to count to 10? And this works both ways. You know, we often use that when somebody makes you angry, count to 10. Well, that's true. But how about the fact that when someone comes back to you in their anger, before you answer, you count to 10? There would be individuals that learn to think before we speak, that we truly control what we feel, we truly control what we're thinking. Anger oftentimes leads to more anger, and it leads to irrational thinking. And so we have to understand, here we have this anger, we feel this anger, they feel this anger, and we have to ask ourselves, does it really matter? In the scope of things, first of all, in the scope of life itself, does it really matter what we're upset about? Are we upset about something that in the long run will really matter? Are we upset about something in the scheme of things with regards to life really matters? Or are we just mad? Are we just angry? Are we mad about something that in 5 to 10 years from now will really matter? You see, the wise man, according to Proverbs 29, the wise man knows how to control himself. He doesn't vent himself. He doesn't vent his anger. What does he do? He controls himself. He controls his anger. He controls what's going on. He learns to understand that he must be slow. Yeah, I think this is also another verse that probably James had in mind in James 1 verse 19, where he says, we're to be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. And we need to learn to be individuals that have a boiling point that is not right down there with every little thing. You know, some people just get mad at everything that comes their way. There's nothing that they're happy about. There's nothing that they're satisfied with. There's nothing that you can do or anybody else can do that would put a smile on their face. then part of that is they can't control themselves. Alexander the Great was that way. You know, Alexander the Great basically, you might say, conquered the known world in his day and age, but he couldn't control his anger. And one day, in a fit of rage, he killed his very best friend, Cletus. Not intentionally, not intending to, but because he couldn't control his anger. The wise man, Solomon says, the wise man is slow to wrath. He's slow to anger. It takes a lot to get him mad. It takes a lot for him to work up into a lather. It takes a lot for him to be upset. And just because somebody's upset at you, first of all, does not mean that you have the right or that it's good for you to get mad. And just because they're mad doesn't mean that you have to be mad. Or just because they did something that you don't like, or just because they said something that you don't necessarily agree with, doesn't mean you have to get mad either. You see, we need to learn to control ourselves, control our spirit, control the way we feel. That's not often easy, is it? I've run into people through the years that have told me. I had one lady that I would visit on a regular basis, but she said she would tell you what she thought, and she'd say, I tell you what I think. And I always felt, I never did tell her, but I always felt like saying, yeah, but there are some things that you think that I don't need to hear. The wise man, Solomon says, has a slow fuse. He listens. He's slow to wrath. He's slow to anger. He's slow in coming up against what's happening. But then thirdly, Solomon says, if you want to diffuse anger, give a gift. Look with me in Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 14. I think it's interesting the way the New King James Version reads it. He says, a gift secret pacifies anger. A secret gift pacifies anger, but a bribe behind the back, that's not so good, is it? A gift, a secret gift, pacifies anger. You ever given a gift to somebody that's angry at you? Yeah, did it, preacher, just to watch them fume. I did it, preacher, just to watch them get upset. I did it, preacher, just to see what they do. That's not the best of motives, but it is the best of ideas. In Romans the 12th chapter, Paul makes the statement in verse 17 that as much as lies in you, live peaceably with all men. Don't you like that? Don't you like that idea? Don't you like the idea really of living peaceably with everybody? I do. But then he tells, as he goes on, he says, if your enemy hungers, feed him. If he thirsts, give him water to drink. For in so doing, you'll heap coals of fire upon his head. But now within all of that context, Paul quotes out of the book of Isaiah where God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. You see, we sometimes want to get back at people and get upset with people because we think it our duty and our right and our responsibility. And the reality of it is, it's not our duty or right or responsibility. Let's let God handle it. But in letting God handle it and allowing God to handle it and letting God take the lead, if you will, Paul says, why don't you do something good for those that have done something bad to you? Would that include anger? We sometimes look at this verse and we think about it's the idea of retaliation, period. And if somebody has hit us on the right cheek, that we ought to be individuals that do something good for them. And yes, that's part of this verse, but wouldn't anger also fit in this verse? I think so. If we're to live peaceably with all men, then sometimes we have to give a gift. You see, it's not easy, is it? It's not easy to look at someone that's mad at you, that's upset at you, and to tell them how nice you think they are. to how wonderful you thought they did something, and you have to, now look, you have to be honest. Flattery, you'll read the book of Proverbs, flattery says, Solomon says flattery is not that which you want to practice. So you have to be truthful and you have to be honest. You see, anger, a lot of times, can be done away with. We can disperse of anger. If we'll learn to give something good and do something good for someone that's done something to us. If someone is angry with us, if we'll learn to give them a gift, if we'll learn to compliment them, if we'll learn to look for the good instead of the bad, look for the positive instead of the negative, look for something that we can gain out of this situation instead of what we seemingly are losing out of this situation. Solomon says, we defer our anger and we grow from it. But then, fourthly, the wise man Solomon in the book of Proverbs tells us, if you look in your Bibles in the book of Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 11, Solomon gives us some great advice. He says it's the discretion of a man that makes him slow to anger and his glory is to overlook a transgression. Discretion is often the better part of valor, isn't it? Discretion is difficult because discretion causes us to take a step back and to look at the whole situation and look what's going on and why it's going on. And to see not just our side, but to see the other fellow's side. And oftentimes, especially with anger, we're quick to jump on it. And hasty in our decisions and hasty in our words, the very things that we talked about this morning, we should not be. But as we do that, as we are like that, what happens? We lose our sense of discretion, of focus. And yet, it's the discretion of a man that thinks about the situation and thinks about it at hand. I am not a gambler. Not just for practical reasons, but I am not a gambler because the Bible tells me not to gamble. The Bible tells me to work for what I make, and it doesn't tell me to use my money to gamble. Whether it's okayed by the state in the lottery or it's some game on Thursday night with my friends or something on the internet. But I do like the song that Kenny Rogers had out a few years ago, The Gambler, because there's a philosophy in there, and I know he's talking about gambling, but there's a philosophy in there with regards to life that's good. As you know, he says you've got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. And then he goes on, of course, talking about gambling. He says, you never count your money while sitting at the table, for there'll be time enough to count when the dealing's done. Now, like I say, I'm not a gambler, and I'm telling you, don't gamble. But I'm telling you, you can take that philosophy and work it, and it works great. There's a time in which you just simply be quiet. There's a time when you have to sit back. There's a time in which you have to really just maybe even walk away from the situation and maybe even run. There's a discretion that has to be involved in all of this. And part of that discretion is, why are they angry? And are they angry at me? Or are they angry at the situation? Or are they angry at life and they're taking it out on me? Are they mad at the dog and kicking the cat? Or are they mad at the cat and kicking the dog? Are they upset with me and what I've said? Or are they just upset at something that happened a while ago? And then part of that discretion says, if they're angry with me, why are they angry with me? And maybe I need to look at me and see if I need to fix me. Because maybe I am wrong. And you say, I can't believe you'd say that. No, my wife is the one that's saying, I can't believe Paul Darety would say that. But the wise man Solomon reminds us, as we looked at a couple of weeks ago, in Proverbs the 4th chapter, that we need to look at ourselves. We need to look at our lips, look at our ears, look at our eyes. We need to look at ourselves. And that's part of that discretion that comes about in living life. And so when folks get angry with us, we have to say, okay, is now the time to talk to them? Is now the time to get back with them? Is now the time to get through this? And sometimes it is. Sometimes you have to say, okay, we're going to work through this, and we're going to work through it now. And then you say, but preacher, how are you going to do that? You go back to the very first point. A soft answer turns away wrath. See how it kind of all works back together? And so we have to learn to use our discretion. It's not easy. And it seems like it doesn't always work, because you see, folks get angry. I think I shared with you the story about the woman that when she got married, she had a shoebox. And that shoebox was up in the closet. And she told her husband, she said, never look in the shoebox. And he said, I'll never look in your shoebox. She was sick. They were older, and she was sick, and it didn't look like she was going to make it. And so the husband went into the closet and looked into the shoebox. And when he looked in the shoebox, there were 2 crocheted dolls and $25,000. And he thought, what in the world? And so he went to her and he said, honey, he said, these 2 crocheted dolls that I found in that shoebox, can you explain them to me? And she said, yes. She said, before we got married, my mama said that I should never get angry with you, and when I was angry with you, don't fight with you, but just go out and crochet a doll. And he said, that's wonderful. We've been married all these years, and you only crocheted $2. You only got mad at me twice. He said, well, how did you save $25,000? She said, that's from selling all those others that I made before. We get angry. It's just part of us. Yet we need to learn how to turn that anger around. Preacher. Jesus grew angry. Jesus ran the money changers out of the temple. He overthrew their tables. Jesus got angry a couple of times through the accounts of his life. If he can get angry, I can get angry, because after all, I'm supposed to be like Jesus, aren't I? Jesus' anger and our anger are really 2 different things. Jesus' anger was never selfish. It was not over his way or his will. It was over God's will. And when he got angry not for the consumption of himself or for the glory of himself, but he got angry over people not doing what God would have them to do. So now that could add a twist, and that's a whole different sermon, but let me just throw out the thought. Do you get angry when you see folks that don't do the will of God? That's when you should get angry. Not over the fact that they left the top off of the tube, or the top off of the jar, or that they left something sitting out, or they didn't put something up, or they didn't do this, or they didn't do that, or they said this, or they said that, or whatever it may be. We need to learn, though, to get mad at the right times and the right people. I found this quote this week in studying from this. It's from Aristotle. I liked it. I thought it was really, in some ways, what I was trying to say. He said, Aristotle made the statement, he says, anyone can become angry. But to become angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, in the right way, this is not easy. He pretty well hit the nail on the head, don't you think? So then you have to ask yourself, is there just anger? Well, there is when you get mad at folks that don't do the will of God, but to get mad at somebody just because You don't like something that they did, which gets you back to their opinion and your opinion. What good does it do you? Solomon reminds us, have a soft answer. Give gifts. Be an individual that has discretion. Turn wrath around and learn to get along with people. It's a great advice, I think. It's great advice from Solomon, the old man, to a young man as he writes this book of Proverbs. This evening, if you're not a New Testament child of God, or you're an individual that needs to rededicate your life, if you need to respond to the Lord's invitation, won't you come? While together we stand and sing.